Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Amy Evan, and I want to welcome members of the Governance and Accountability Committee, our AIB, and our colleagues from the Accountability and Implementation Board who've joined us tonight. We have several. As the Pillar 5 Committee, tonight we'll be taking a closer look at one of the more complex parts of that work, progress monitoring and the release of funds, and how these requirements have evolved since the statute was first enacted. We've invited our members of the AIB to help us unpack what the law requires, how the process has developed over the past few years, and what that means for LEAs and counties as they move through the planning, approval, and funding cycles. Then we'll hear from one of our members, Heather, an Associate Superintendent of Fiscal Services with Frederick County Public Schools, and Candace Savage with the Worcester County Administration Office, who will walk us through the budget timeline. First, from the district perspective with Heather, and then this dance that we'll hear about between the LEAs and county governments for appropriation. Heather and Candace will highlight where coordination is really critical, what tends to slow the process down, and where our collective guidance can make it smoother and more predictable. As we dive into our content tonight, I encourage members to keep these three questions in mind. What constitutes sufficient evidence for releasing funds so that the process is clear and fair? The second question, which parts of the timeline are fixed by statute versus those where we might recommend some flexibility or simplification? And then the third question, how can progress monitoring serve as a tool for learning and improvement, as the AIB has taken it into consideration, not just compliance? So by the end of our discussion, our goal is to leave with a clear shared understanding of the statutory framework, the evolving expectations for evidence and timelines, and possible next steps for alignment across the state and our local LEAs. Thank you again for the work you do. And with that, I'll turn it to Javon Zlu to do some introductions for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. Do you guys all see my slideshow right here?
It looks like it's loading. There you go.
All right. As Amy said, I have the lovely pleasure of introducing our two new student members. First, please let me introduce Gavin. I have a bio I'm going to read for him. Gavin is a senior at Long Range High School in Howard County, Maryland, with a strong record of leadership. He leads a statewide student advisory council of over 300 members, serves as a liaison for the Maryland Center for School Safety, and works with legislators on education policy. At his school, he is vice president of student government and founder of the LRHS Key Club, while also competing in speech and debate, in mock trial, and teaching karate as a first-degree black belt. Gavin is committed to amplifying student voices, promoting safety, and fostering collaboration across schools and communities. Please welcome Gavin, and Gavin, want to give you the opportunity to say any words if you wish.
Hey everybody, I'm kind of right now actually just getting back home, but I just want to say I'm so excited to be here. It's a great opportunity to have the student voice inputted, and I'm so honored to be that's one of those two students alongside Vanessa who couldn't make it here tonight. And just a small correction, I am an 11th grader, so I'm a junior, not a senior yet.
Awesome. Sorry about that. I said senior in the bio, but I wrote 11th grade on the slide. Thank you so much, Gavin. All right. Appreciate that, Gavin. Next, want to introduce Vanessa Lee. Vanessa is a senior at Leonardtown High School and St. Mary's County Public Schools. She has held leadership roles at the school, county, and state levels, including serving as state legislative affairs coordinator for the Maryland Association for Student Councils and chairing the Superintendent's Student Leadership Advisory Council. Vanessa is also active in her school's chamber choir and volunteers at a local nursing home. As student member of the board, she is committed to empowering students, promoting educational opportunities, and strengthening communication between students and the Board of Education. I don't currently see Vanessa. I hope when she gets here, she's able to say some few words, but please welcome me in joining Vanessa. And thank you. I'll pass it back to Amy.
Thank you, Lou. At this time, Rachel, if there are any AIB updates that you can provide?
Sure, I am going to keep the updates pretty tight tonight, but I'm going to offer the opportunity for questions if there's anything specific that anybody would like to ask. But as usual, we have picked a hefty topic. And so I want to use the majority of our time to dedicate towards the topic and the presentations and the Q&A. But in terms of updates, it's always busy at the AIB. There's always good stuff happening over here with Blueprint and with our work with the Accountability and Implementation Board. And so the biggest things that I would highlight right now are that we are still continuing the progress monitoring check-ins, which are individual check-ins with each county that we're going to talk about a little bit tonight as well, but we've talked about those in a prior session. We have met with close to 2/3 now of the counties, and we'll be wrapping up by the first week in November. 2 counties did need to reschedule, so we are going to be extending into that first week just because the calendar was completely packed in the late part of October. But broadly, the progress monitoring meetings have been really a wonderful opportunity. So they are in person in either Baltimore or Annapolis, and around the table there are representatives from the AIB board, the AIB staff, the LEA, and the LEA has the opportunity to bring whichever leadership folks they would like to bring with them to the table to help discuss broad Blueprint implementation. So we've really enjoyed the conversations. I think that they've been just a great opportunity to explain the nuance of Blueprint implementation across the state of Maryland. So we'll talk a little bit more tonight in the presentation about how the progress monitoring ties into release of funds, or really just what we've been learning as we go through the progress monitoring about different topics. So beyond that, the other big piece that I would point everybody to is that we do have a big meeting on Thursday, our monthly AIB meeting. In this meeting, there's quite a few topics that we'll be covering, but some of them connect to what we're talking about tonight. And we're knee deep in reviewing career ladders and career counseling MOUs. And so more of those will be presented for board approval. And then there are several other topics that will be part of this week's meeting. So if you want to catch it live, it will begin at 1. And if you aren't able to catch it live, it will be recorded and available on our website, which is one final announcement that I'll make, that our website has been redone and it is live and new and amazing. So you'll see that we've gone from just the basic website that kicked us off, that got us out the gate and explaining what Blueprint was, to a much more dynamic website that has easier access to a whole lot of information and resources and content. Pretty much everything that was there before you'll find. If you're looking for the law, it's there. If you're looking for the meetings, they're still there. You're gonna see the same structures, but you're also gonna see way more information about where things are, what progress is looking like. The website that launched is great, and it will keep growing. So we will have data dashboards coming around December, before December 1, I believe, that are in development and almost there. There's other pieces that we'll continue adding now that we have a better backbone of the website, that we have space to put more things on it. So if you haven't clicked around our website in a while, now's a great time to come see it with a fresh look and a lot more content. So aib.maryland.gov. In terms of updates, those are the 3 main ones that I bring to you tonight. Are there any questions about broad Blueprint, or any broad questions for the AIB staff that are joining tonight? Doing short wait time, and I think we're good. So on to our topic for tonight, if that's good with everybody. Okay, perfect. So tonight, as we're looking at the release of funds, I do want to take a minute to introduce the staff who are joining us. So we have several of our staff that are available to be here, because this topic stretches across many of the staff on our team. So I'd like to take a moment and I'll pass it first to Heidi, and then we have two people on our fiscal team, Alex and Simone, that'll be able to support with any questions that we have as it relates to the fiscal side of things. So Heidi, do you want to say hi to everybody?
Sure thing. My name is Heidi Dederar, and I'm counsel to the AIB. I've been with the agency since about December of 2022. I really enjoy this work, and happy to answer any questions that you might have throughout the meeting.
Awesome. And Alex, then Simone?
I'll go next if Alex doesn't want to go. I am Simone. My name is, my name is Simone. My position is a financial data analyst for the AIB. And I'm happy to be here. I will pass it to Alex.
Try it again. I don't know if
There you are.
can hear me, but I'm Alex Vernon. I'm the finance director, and I've been with the AIB since 2023.
Awesome. And so we're going to tag team the content presentation and answering any questions that may come up. I'm going to tell you up front, we may not have answers to everything. And so we will be taking good notes if we're unable to offer you a complete answer, but we'll talk a little bit more about that as we begin going through the slides here. So we can go ahead and advance. As you know, we always start with our purpose, and just a reminder about the Blueprint's unprecedented the investment that has been made into the Maryland public education system, and that really it covers from early childhood all the way through high school and post-secondary education, with a goal of, regardless of where any student lives, that they will receive a world-class education here in our Maryland public schools that prepares them for success in college, career, and life. We can go to the next slide. This is just a quick reminder about the structure of the Blueprint Comprehensive Plan and the way that the pillar organization. I thought it was just helpful too to look at Pillar 5 and see that this is a reminder of why this fits into Pillar 5, that it's really all about the funding side of things, the governance and the accountability, and really monitoring implementation to make sure that we're on track across the state for successful implementation of Blueprint initiatives and expectations. There is a tie to this, to that last section there about requiring schools to demonstrate that at least 75% of the per student formula funding follows students to their schools. That will come into play in this particular component as well. So now into the warning. You're going to recognize this slide from back in the spring, where we have to set a few expectations here. Thinking about that iceberg analogy again, this is a really complex topic. We could spend hours and hours talking about this with you, but tonight what we've brought you is an overview, a very high-level overview to introduce you to the topic and to kind of get your feet wet. You may have initial questions or clarification questions, and then as you process it, more questions as you dig deeper in your understanding. Secondly, you're probably going to feel that information overload again. We're going to be throwing a lot of terms at you. We're going to be throwing a lot of dates and a lot of information and some law and just all kinds of stuff. Don't be surprised if it feels like a lot. We think it feels like a lot oftentimes, just sorting through it and understanding it. And then finally, with our third piece here, you're probably going to have a lot of questions. There's probably going to be like just two types, the clarifications and the, now that I know this, what's it mean about this? Please save those questions. We will come to them. We will have time for Q&A. We also don't mind pausing along the way. If you want to clarify something in the moment, that is fine as well. I will be very clear. There may be questions that you have that we do have to take back and really figure those out with the board, with our board members. And it's a complex topic. So if there are questions that we can't answer, please don't be surprised if we do need to tell you that we're gonna write that one down, and we'll be back and we will follow up with that. So just want to be clear out the gate that it's a lot. And so for tonight, we hope that we're able to clearly communicate and explain the vision and purpose behind the Blueprint's release of fund mechanisms, that we provide an overview of the key components and processes related to the fund release, that we build that awareness and understanding of what's happened in the prior years and what's happening this year, and then give some hints about what's to come in the future, and that we clarify the roles, timelines, and responsibilities of the AIB and other key stakeholders that are involved in these processes. The agenda gives you a sense of how we're going to organize and structure that. And with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off. Our Heidi Duderar is going to help explain a lot of the legal background about what sets this up and where it came from and what it means. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Heidi.
So I'm sorry to start us off with a slide with a jillion words. I wanted to really ground us in the statute and what, where these requirements come from. So I just thought I'd start off giving us a little history of the blueprint and release of funds. So beginning in fiscal 2023, the statute required that 25% of the increase in state share of major education aid, so the increase year over year, be automatically withheld from a local school system for the next fiscal year. So it's withheld by operation of law. Also, beginning in that same fiscal year, the statute provided that the AIB was required to release funds withheld under that was by the operation of law, withheld under the law, if the AIB found that the local school system had met the minimum guidelines for the submission of their initial implementation plan. That was that year where there were sort of just like page numbers, a page limit, a template. We were just trying to, get the ball rolling. In fiscal 24 and 25, so the last two fiscal years, the statute provided that the board was required to release funds withheld under the law if the board found that the local school system or a public school had developed and received approval for its initial implementation plan and any subsequent modifications. So that's where we were over the last 2 years. Really, as you can see, those last 3 years were focused on implementation and implementation plans, setting that framework for where we head from here. Beginning in this fiscal year 2026, the statute, we're going to pivot. The statute provides that the board shall consider releasing funds withheld by law if the board either receives a recommendation to release funds from MSDE, the CTE committee, or an expert review team, or if the board on its own determination finds that a public school or local school system has either made sufficient progress on its implementation plan, and this is really on implementing versus on drafting. So we're into making sure that things are happening, or has taken appropriate steps to improve student performance. So we're going to start getting very focused on outcomes. We've been focused on inputs. We're going to be pretty focused on outcomes moving forward. So what happens if the AIB finds that funding should not be released? So you may have heard of sort of our the process whereby the AIB provides a warning and then goes through a process after that. So on or before December 1st in each year, if the board finds that funding for a specific LEA or a public school, so it could be the full district or it could be just a single school or group of schools, depending on what the issue is. On or before December 1st, the AIB has to issue an initial warning to the school principal or the county superintendent that funds may not be released in the next fiscal year. So practically speaking, the AIB has to make that decision in its November meeting in order to meet that December 1st deadline. And then on or before February 1st, the board has to make its final determination on whether to release funds for the next fiscal year. So essentially, the statute gives 2 months for an LEA or a public school to sort of cure whatever the issue is. And if that doesn't happen, so again, practically speaking, at its January meeting, the board would have to make that decision. The board would then notify by July 1st the state superintendent and the controller, of its intent to, or of its decision to either release, not release, or withhold additional funds, which we'll get to next. Also, the governor, the leadership of the General Assembly. There is another process in the statute where the board may determine it is necessary to release or to release or not release or withhold funds for the current fiscal year. So if something extraordinary were to happen and the board found that, okay, we need to withhold funds right now, they do have that ability per statute, and there are no statutory timelines or required warnings for a current year withholding of funds. So we use these words withhold versus not release. So we just talked about the fact that by the automatic operation of law, the increase in the state share of major education aid year over year is already withheld. 25% of that is withheld. The board may withhold more than that 25% that has already been automatically withheld. They may decide, nope, we need to withhold more if, in the judgment of the board, a local school system has not made satisfactory efforts to develop or revise its implementation plan. A public school or local school system has not made sufficient progress on its plan, or the public school or local school system has not taken appropriate steps to improve student performance. Again, we're becoming pretty focused here on outcomes. I mean, there is some on developing or revising an implementation plan, but the focus here is mainly on outcomes. The board, this is sort of a separate section. The board may also withhold from state agencies. There are state agencies that are required to develop and continually update their implementation plans. So if a state agency that's responsible for developing an implementation plan either has not developed an initial implementation plan or has not had its plan approved, or has not implemented its implementation plan appropriately, the board can withhold funds. There's no restriction on the amount or timing of when that happens. The board has developed two processes in accordance with law that are related both of them are related to the release or withholding of funds. The first one is directly related. It's an appeals process that's required. And throughout this presentation, I should have said this at the beginning, at the end of each one of these little sentences, you might see like 5-405K or something like that. These are references to the education article, the Maryland Annotated Code. So if you're looking back at this presentation, you'll know where to look in the statute. So the board developed an appeals process through which the public school or a local school system can contest the withholding of funds or the not releasing of funds under law. A written appeal is due within 30 calendar days after the AIB decision. So if the AIB decision is made in mid-January at its January meeting, there would be 30 days after that when a written appeal would be due to be filed. The AIB decision then a written AIB decision would issue within 60 days after the appeal is filed or after the date of an oral argument, whichever is later. The board has also developed in accordance with law a waiver process through which the local school system can request greater flexibility in meeting minimum school funding requirements. To date, one waiver request has been filed and granted for Carroll County Public Schools. The waiver process was amended over the summer. The former due date was pushed out a little bit. And so now written waiver requests are due on or before December 1st in the first fiscal year for which the waiver is being requested. So an LEA could request a waiver for multiple fiscal years if they know they're going to need one, but that request would be due on or before December 1st in that first fiscal year of your request. Also, there is guidance on the AIB website for submitting LEA funding waiver requests. Now I'll pass it over to Rachel.
Awesome. So I'm assuming that many of you, your brains are kind of full right now, and I'm going to give a chance here to clarify and ask some questions after we just kind of summarize that section with the release of funds process really ensures that the public investment follows this commitment to Blueprint's transformation and the initiatives that are expected to be occurring in each of the school systems. So I want to pause and see if there's any questions that anybody wants to surface or any clarifications about the information you've just heard before we dig in a little bit deeper. All right, we're going to keep going. Next slide. There are, oh, I think we might have skipped one slide. There we go. Thank you. There are a couple key attributes that we want to make sure that you heard in there. It is an annual process. So there are, each year we do go through this process, and we are looking at each of the components that are eligible for consideration that year, and then a decision is made annually. Those funds are held until a determination is made. So they're released when the AIB finds that an LEA has met all applicable criteria for that fiscal year, and the board members vote to release the funds that were withheld by law. It is accountability linked to ensure that the funding supports the intended transformation. It's not just business as usual, but that there are expectations in Blueprint that need to be implemented and that they are being monitored. And broadly, most of the information that we're bringing to you tonight is very specific to how this works for LEAs. Heidi did mention there are places where it's connected to the state agent. For tonight, we're the lens of the local education agencies. The release of funds mechanism ensures that that investment follows intentional, actionable action, accountable action, aligning the dollars with demonstrable progress towards their education vision. Next, we're going to go into the key considerations and processes of the release of funds mechanism. And that we kind of want to take you back in history here a little bit to talk about how this has evolved over years. And basically, when Blueprint kicked off, when we were first launching the AIB, the LEAs and state agencies were required to develop Blueprint implementation plans. And Heidi shared some of that process, that as they were developing those plans, they were submitted to the AIB for review and for requests for any modifications or to ensure alignment to the law. And then once they were approvable, they were passed to the AIB board members to vote, and after their review, to make that determination that they were approvable, and to then release the funds. In subsequent years, there have been other parts of the plan that have become additional things that need to be reviewed. So the career counseling MOUs, which are partnerships between local workforce boards, LEAs, and community colleges, need to be updated sometimes annually, oftentimes annually, because the budget changes each year. That began in 2023 and then became an annual process thereafter. In 2024, it continued to include the Blueprint MOUs, and then we saw the first required submission of the career ladder plans. That again continues into 2025. In 2024, we had comprehensive literacy plans that were due, and now this year, comprehensive math plans that are required. And then minimum school funding has components that have been required each year for each of the LEAs to complete. Go to the next slide. The consideration for the release of funds, this shows you the list for this year of all of the pieces that the LEAs are submitting and that the AIB staff are reviewing, and AIB board members. So these are being review process for many of these. Attendance at the Progress Monitoring Conference is one of those components this year. The MOU for career counseling, the career ladders for 2025, which has an additional submission and components required this year that build upon last year's submission. their pre-K to 12 comprehensive mathematics plan, and minimum school funding requirements. Anything on red on this slide is a hyperlink that you can click on and access the folders of either the last one, you'll see the joint policy, and on the first two, it will actually take you to submissions for those counties that are currently approved. The folders will grow as we continue to approve more counties. They will ultimately all be available in there. We can go to the next slide. Last section here is roles, responsibilities, and timelines for the release of funds. When we think about the roles, we've kind of hinted to it, but to nail it home, the AIB reviews and approves the LEA plans, including all of those submissions and the fiscal reporting. The AIB staff provide feedback to the LEAs, and then ultimately the board members decide on the release of funds or withholding of funds. And the AIB is also responsible for monitoring ongoing implementation. The members who monitor, the AIB members monitor blueprint implementation, progress, success, and challenges. And throughout these processes, they do discuss and determine the policies and guidance needed as questions arise. Our state agency partners are also developing and submitting plans, responding to the feedback that they receive and carrying out the approved actions and reporting requirements. They also have a role in making recommendations to the AIB for the release of funds beginning in fiscal year 26 and moving forward. And those would include the Maryland State Department of Education, the CTE committee, and the expert review teams of both MSDE and the CTE committee. The local education agencies are developing and submitting their implementation plans, responding to feedback, carrying out the approved actions, and reporting. And they also attend and engage in progress monitoring meetings. They share implementation successes and challenges, and they provide insights on the implementation issues as they arise. On the next slide, we'll talk about a couple of the timelines. Timelines and communications. The AIB is in constant contact with the LEAs and state partners as they're submitting pieces. And then ultimately, once the AIB board approves plans and components of the required items, the LEA gets notified at the end once everything has been satisfied. And they get notification along the way. There's a lot of communication that goes back and forth between the LEAs and the AIB regarding each of these components. We do want to draw attention to the fact that this work is embedded within the larger local budgeting timelines of county governments and local school systems, which we have some information being shared by a couple of our members of the advisory committee here after this section. But broadly, we do just want to mention that the school budgets are drafted in the winter, they're shared with county governments, they're revised for approval. These timelines do vary across the state, dependent on the governance models and the local charter guidelines. And while those budget timelines may differ slightly across jurisdictions, they all occur within the same broad window and align with the AIB submission and approval deadlines. On the next slide, we've kind of reached the end of the information overload part, and we're happy to take any questions. Again, we may not have answers to everything, but we certainly will take them back and bring back any clarification or any new information that we're able to share. So I'm going to take a deep breath and pause and let you process what you've heard. And we're all here, including Alex Vernon and Simone Hall, for any fiscal questions, if there are any. And then Heidi and I will field any questions about the content that we have shared. So we're open for questions. This is what information overload feels like.
So I just have one practical question. I checked on the AIB's website and I didn't see the PowerPoint presentation. When I went to the agenda, I just saw the agenda, but I didn't see the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes,
so it would be helpful to see because of the different links. And I was wondering, during our progress meetings that we've been having, and Frederick County had theirs at the beginning of the month, although it seems like 100 years ago. In regards to the timelines that are written in legislation about like the budget being available and ready, really our first Power School load, which is 8/15, I think we found some practical concerns over that because typically there's a lot of shifting and the budget really gets realigned once your first 10-month salary happen, which for FCPS, because we pay in arrears, and I believe most counties do, is the 9/15 payroll. So we were able to, after 9/15, we were able to then project and have, because we pretty much have everybody in place then. So our 10/15 load to Power School, which would be your September load, reflected the budget in a more complete way. So I was just wondering, is there any thought about that process? And then also in regards to the waiver, is there any thought about a secondary waiver process? Because for some schools, it could be a teacher leaving halfway through the year could get you out of compliance. And I think that's across the board at most LEAs. Our budgets are so tight that could really change something. And we might not know that until April. So I understand the December deadline because of the release of funds and everything. But I was just wondering if there's going to, as we go through it and think about process improvement, will there be an opportunity for a secondary waiver process? Maybe like a very limited one because, oops, we had it budgeted, but what happened.
Did you already take that one, Rachel?
That'd be great. And I wondered too, I don't know if you want Alex or Simone for the first fiscal one or not, but if you got it all, please.
Yeah, I mean, no, certainly Alex and Simone. I mean, if just so I understand, you mentioned some statutory budgetary deadlines. Heather, yeah.
It was written, I believe, that, by July 1, you had to have your budget. And that was kind of the first review because, of course, at this time of year, you don't really have expenditures for fiscal year 26. And I can't remember what section it is, but I can find it because it does say July 1. But then because we don't load our July data until 8/15, it's kind of been, oh, well, we're going to use 8/15. But practically speaking, that's where I was wondering in regards to, like, does 10/15, because of the payroll needing to hit and, that opportunity. But I can find you I don't have it because I have it bookmarked at my work computer, but I don't have it bookmarked at my home computer.
Sure. And like Alex or Simone, maybe we'll jump in on that. But certainly we've been driving off of in looking at certainly the waiver request policy. We originally had an October deadline for the waiver request, and we, in trying to be responsive to the things that we heard from CFOs from LEAs, across the state, we did move that deadline to December 1st. That's less about the sort of the warning, because we'll have already done warnings by then for that fiscal year. We have to, remember, the board has to make its decision in November. So really, what you do in December for that waiver process is really sort of a separate thing. I would say that I think we've heard before this request or idea about a secondary waiver request process, and that is certainly something that the board will take under advisement. I think what would be really helpful for us is for the LEAs and CFOs to kind of give us an idea of like what a good date would be for that, a good deadline for that secondary process. So that's a way that you could help us. And Alex, did you have anything else that you wanted to provide on that?
Simone could probably speak a little bit more to this because she's been at these progress monitoring conferences. So she's got some of the in-person data that she's been reviewing. However, I do just want to add that is one of the main reasons why we have encouraged LEAs to submit their budgeted data, is just so that we are able to see what the planned expenditures are, even though that at that pool that expenditure might not hit yet. That way we can kind of paint the picture and see that it was at least projected to be an expenditure. And then Simone, if you want to add to that, or
No, I think you said exactly what I was going to say. The budget kind of stands, or in our case, is like indicative of, okay, here was the plan, here was the effort that we wanted to make, but then, life happens, things happen, throughout the year. Teachers leave, or we have turnover, all the things. And so we can look back at that budget and say, okay, so here was their plan, here was their intention, and that's what we'll kind of compare it to.
Any other questions we can answer? Amy, should we pass it to Heather and Candace?
I think that's a great idea, Rachel. If there's no other questions, I'm going to share my screen for them. Step 2. All right, Heather.
So what I wanted to try to help understand, and I know Candace is going to provide the county's version of this, is how the budgetary timeline works, because there's always a lot of questions about how we ask for money, what type of funding we receive, and how we know when we're building a budget, how we're going to build the budget. So for Frederick County Public Schools, we actually have started on our FY27 budget process already. We will be presenting at our board meeting on Wednesday to provide the calendar. And, the calendar kind of runs in parallel with our calendar, our local county's calendar, and the state funding timeline. And we have in Frederick County, we have a county executive form of government. We have a charter form of government, and we are in, I guess, year 12-ish of that. So we had a board of county commissioners, and now we have the charter form of government. So we are in the process of working to create and release the superintendent's recommended budget, which we will be releasing in January. And so we will release that budget prior to the governor's budget being released, prior to knowing what type of funding our county will be giving us. And essentially in Frederick County, we are a maintenance of effort county, which means that we have a per pupil allocation that's established by your county's previous year's funding. If you get one more student, they only have to increase it by that per pupil amount. So if it was $10,000 and you got one more kid, it's plus $10,000 for the next year. And so when we submit a request, we typically request above maintenance of effort. And so this slide just kind of breaks it down. So we'll be releasing our superintendent's recommended budget in January. Our local funding timeline. So in January and most of February, our board will be working on their requested funding, their requested local funding, and that is due to the county by February 28th. Our county executive by charter has to release her budget on April the 15th, on or about April the 15th. She usually does it that day. And then it becomes the county council's budget, and then they have until May 31st to approve the budget. Typically, they approve it earlier. But we start trying to balance our budget once we get the county executive's number. Because the county executive, at least in Frederick County, when she establishes the education funding for FCPS, it's set. It cannot be decreased by the county council. So that is in statute in the charter. So that gives us a pretty good jumping off place so that we know where we are. At the same time, the state, of course, is having their budgetary process. And for LEAs, the budgetary process is really based upon our enrollments. It's based upon your K-12 enrollment, that's your foundation enrollment, and then also some other subgroups, including compensatory ed, which is your K-12 students who receive free and reduced meals, your multilingual learners, your special education, and some other various categories. And it's really driven by your enrollments. And so that is released on the governor's budget. We submit our enrollments in November, and then the governor's budget is released in January. And I'm sure the Department of Legislative Services, OMB, MSCE, they're all doing their behind the scenes work to get the numbers to the governor. And it's all done in a very short time frame. And so the governor's budget is released the third Wednesday, typically, of the year of January. And then the legislative session happens, and there can be changes throughout the legislative sessions. For example, this past legislative session for 2025, there was a proposed change to reduce the amount of the per pupil allocation for several of the funding categories, which would have impacted FCPS with a reduction of about $5.6 million. So that's a significant amount of money when you're planning your budget. And the other thing that this happens now, Frederick County is one of the few counties in the state of Maryland that has experiencing growth. In the past 5 years, we've grown by about 10%. And so this funding is always based upon your previous year's enrollment. So you're planning for your school, and we're budgeting for a school with an enrollment that's typically higher. And so that gives a lagging funding for any of the funding that we receive from the state. But it's interesting because, FCPS and all LEAs, we don't propose taxes. We have no taxing authority in the state of Maryland. We can't incur debt. So we're really beholden to the state and local government. For FCPS, we receive about 95% of our funding from state and local government. And for us, it's about an even split. For other counties, because all state funding is wealth equalized, so if your county is richer, they expect your county government to have a greater share of the funding. There are counties that get significantly more funding from the state, and there are counties that get significantly less funding from the state than Frederick County. So when you hear about the 25% of new funds being withheld, it can vary greatly. So for example, in Frederick County Public Schools, if 25% of our new funds for fiscal year 26 were withheld, it would be about $4 million. And so for us, that could be the difference between being able to make a payroll. So that's, and depending upon how much state funding you receive, it could be pretty significant. So that's why understanding these timelines and understanding how much funding you have is very important. The other thing in Frederick County Public Schools is this is a very tight budget. So we really only ever have about 1.5% of our budget at the end of the year as a fund balance that we carry over to next year. So it's money that we just didn't spend. So vacancy positions, better bids, that kind of things, and you carry your money over. So for FCPS in fiscal year 26, we carried over $8 million was our projected fund balance. So if you listen to that and you withhold $4 million, that's a pretty significant amount of money to withhold. But I think it's interesting. The reason why we wanted to show this slide was to provide just how the timeline works. We are making decisions about the superintendent recommended budget without fully knowing our revenues. And the other thing is that the wealth equalization changes every year. And Frederick County has gotten more wealthy. So the percentage of state funding has decreased as a portion of our budget. So understanding all of those, how everything works together is so important because there's so many moving parts, and you're absolutely right. We all basically follow the same timeline. Some LEAs will release their budgets, their superintendent's recommended budgets in December. Some will release them in late January. And we're all doing it based upon estimates. And so understanding how that works is very important. And so I'm going to turn it over to Candace to provide the county perspective and how they see the budgets.
Thank you, Heather. Before we move to Candace, are there any questions for Heather in terms of the LEA budget process? Okay, maybe after Candace shares, we may have a few. So let me shift over to the county timeline. If I can get all these Zoom ribbons out of my way. All right.
So I wanted to show on the left kind of some highlights from the county budget, and on the right, some of the highlights from our Worcester County Public Schools. We also are just picking up our budget process. It technically fully kicks off in November for us. But I think it's important to note, in Worcester County, we get 66% of our revenue from property taxes. We don't get our SDAT report until November 30th. So what that means is we're planning for a budget in November without even knowing yet how much revenue we'll have. So again, those timelines make it extremely difficult as you're beginning the planning process. The LEA is on a similar timeline to kick off their budget. They finalize it, or they need to finalize the proposed budget and submit it to the county by mid-February. So during this time, while the Board of Education is working on their pieces, the county is also receiving the requests from the departments within the county, as well as other outside agencies, Health Department, Commission on Aging, and then we also provide direct funding to our municipalities, to Ocean City, Berlin, Snow Hill, and other municipalities, including Ocean Pines. So the county commissioners won't see the LEA budget until mid-April, and that's when they come in to present to the commissioners. So we are a commissioner form of government, which means that there's no executive, there's no administration done within our office. Our commissioners are both administrative and legislative. So they are the only ones that can make any kind of adjustments to the requested funding. And then we have our first public hearing, would happen the first Tuesday in May. And historically, because they want to hear the public input, they don't make any adjustments to any of the requested funding until after that public hearing has happened. So it's the second week in May before the schools are really finding out how much of their budget would be accepted, or, really get any feedback from the commissioners. And then by code, the county budget must be adopted the first Tuesday in June. And then our LEA typically adopts their final budget the third Tuesday in June. So I just want to kind of highlight how it happened this year and just show how 6 months of planning really gets crunched into about 2 weeks for us, at least in a commissioner form of government. Because also, while all this is going on, we have rumblings at the state of, I know teacher pension was a big one this year, being pushed down. So that's I didn't want to jump up the slide too much and add a third column, but there's certainly other things that Heather spoke to that are impacting our budget as well. So this year in April, the school system came in, presented their initial request. For us, it was $115 million of county funding that they requested. That represents about 80% of their unrestricted budget. And that is due to what Heather touched on, which is the wealth formula. Worcester County is considered, due to the wealth formula that was created, the wealthiest county. So we pay the highest percentage of funding as compared to the state. On May 13th, the commissioners voted to reduce the requested budget by $3.6 million. So on May 13th, they lost approximately 2.5% of their entire budget request. Then on May 28th, they voted to restore $728,000 of that. And then on June 3rd, the day that we were adopting our budget, they restored an additional $151,000. So the school system didn't know how much money they were getting from the county until June 3rd. And due to the short timeline between when the county is adopting their budget and the schools were required to adopt theirs, they had to hold a special meeting on June 12th and provide a new revised budget. Obviously, the time between June 3rd and when that needed to get to their board was probably less than a week. to make all those necessary changes. And at the end, it ended up being over 2% reduction in their initial request. So that on June 17th, they presented their final budget, and it was adopted by both the LEA and the commissioners on the same day. And so, yeah, so in conclusion, you spent 6 months going through this process, and it came down to 2 weeks. And one of those weeks was, unfortunately, our LEA having to rework their entire budget.
Thank you, Candace and Heather. I think one of the burning questions that we had, and the reason we were so thankful that you both were willing to share this process is overlay, and Heather, if you want me to go back to your slide, or if it works to have Candace's slide up, but overlay the timeline of some of the AIB work in terms of release of funds, the waiver process. Where does that fit in to the LEA and county budgeting process?
So the waiver process for fiscal year 26 is actually happening right now. But I will say in Frederick County Public Schools, we are considering fiscal year 27 already. And the main reason is we are opening a brand new school. And so we know that the enrollments will, like, there will technically be no budget for my brand new school because there's no enrollment there in fiscal year 26. So it's interesting because the process kind of lives a little bit outside of it, happens after the budgets are approved. But there's still a lot of even once the budget is approved, there's still a lot of allocations to the schools that happen after the approval process, because there's really, like Candace said, we didn't have our budget finalized until June 26th. So we were able to load our budget, but then had to reallocate it so we could be ready to go. And so knowing exactly where we're going to hit for a particular school, I do appreciate that the AIB gave additional time into December, because that gives us a better opportunity to look at the allocations that we have and has really helped. The majority of our budget, of course, is staffing and benefits. About 86% of our $970 million is staffing and benefits. So it's really about making sure you have the right people in the right places. And we have a tiered staffing model that looks at all of the various complexity factors at a school that helps to ensure that. But it's that if something changes, having that chance to deal with that change, because it really does come down to the 11th hour in regards to getting your budget completed. And I will say, one of the things Candace mentioned is there's also things happening at the state legislature that could really change a budget. The moving of the pension costs down to the counties, I think affected what counties were planning on giving to their LEAs, because it was another cost on behalf of the LEA that they had to incur. And so the county government is waiting to get their tax revenue estimates and their property tax revenue estimates. And so they're doing everything in a very truncated time frame too, while waiting to see what happens at the state. So there's, from January to April, I think we all, it's a rough time because you're listening and trying to understand how whatever legislation might happen could change, could make a change for the county, which would then affect the LEA.
And I think just that process of having to make those changes in such a short time period just leaves room for errors, or you could have allocated a different way. You're making rush decisions, and do you really know? And again, I live on this side and not that side, but do you really know by December 1st if those allocations were done properly and you're ready to decide whether or not you need the waiver. And I guess, I don't know if it's appropriate. I do have a question about that going back to the waiver. It's okay.
Yeah, with that note, let's open it up for questions. Go ahead, Candace.
So you mentioned the waiver is due December 1st. That would be decided in the November meeting. Would there be a situation where maybe by the time we got to November, or maybe when we got to a point where a major expenditure hits, that it skews the expenses so far that in February they would pull it back up for a final decision? Or would it always be, you have to get the initial warning before you can get a final decision in February?
So and I maybe not have been clear enough about this before. The decision about providing an initial warning is due, the board has to make that decision at its November meeting in order to make that December 1st deadline. That's a separate deadline. Waiver requests aren't due until December 1st. And so that's a separate process. That's not part of that warning process. It theoretically could be part of the warning process for the next year. So the next December 1st warning, but it's not going to match up time-wise to be part of that warning process that's happening at the same time. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. So, but it leads me to another question.
Mm-hmm.
So, as part of the waiver, one of the, I guess the very last one was minimum school funding, and it was regarding the joint the state and AIB statement. So, how are you evaluating? I guess you're probably evaluating fiscal year 25, right, to determine if you're going to withhold funding. So, because there wasn't really a set amount, it was kind of our baseline year. How are you evaluating that? Is it like for example, Frederick County Public Schools, we turned in our Power School report every month on time. That was one of the things that became a question when CFOs were talking about it, because we know that it's coming up, but we weren't sure what the evaluation would be for that.
Correct. And that evaluation is going to be conducted by the board. And it will be part of the decision making for FY25 for that December 1st warning process. I don't know if we have the joint policy that we could pull up, but I don't think we need to. I think if you go into that policy and you look at the FY25 requirement, I know there aren't numbers there, but there is a statement of what the AIB would be looking for. In terms of, and I know it's very broad, but it is within their discretion to determine what meets that requirement.
Well, you know how us number of people are. We like to have lots of specificity. So, because we like to,
I think you probably named a few things that certainly provide some evidence of what the board would be looking for. It may not be all that they're looking for, but certainly evidence that would comply with that criteria that's listed in that policy.
well, I will read that policy. Thank you. Thanks for linking it, because that's super helpful.
Okay, sure.
Lou, you got your hand up.
Oh yeah. Thinking out loud right now, first of all, just thank you guys so much for the presentation, the big picture overview, especially from the finance side of things. That's something as a teacher I don't think too much, so thank you for giving me something to think about on that. I'm just thinking about, I guess, the relevancy with all this to from the teacher perspective and also like the students and the families I serve. I do know every year there's the school input sessions on the budget, district level budget input sessions. I'm just trying to think, what aspects would you say of everything we've talked about today that's most relevant and important for teachers, students, and families to know?
Well, I'm going to jump in. I think understanding minimum school funding is incredibly important, because if you're in a school that doesn't have a significant population beyond a foundation K to 12. So let's say, so for example, in Frederick County, our farm rate, our free and reduced meals rate for the entire county is about 30%. But we have some schools where their farm rate is about 8%. And so when you look at a school with similar enrollment in the school, depending upon how the school is, how the student groups are, what the demographics are, could be a significant change in what your per pupil allocation is for that school. So it can mean, and rightfully so, right? Like if there are populations that need significant supports, that's the entire intent of the AIB, of a minimum school funding and blueprint. They want to make sure there's resources. But for a lot of us, excuse me, for schools that are not very diverse in regards to student population, we actually have to overfund them in foundation to ensure that they get the minimum school amounts. I will say this, if you're interested in watching a board meeting, Mr. Stansky, who is the CFO at Anne Arundel County, at the last board meeting, he did a really great presentation on minimum school funding and was talking about how it may affect individual schools. I'm actually doing one on Wednesday, so you'll see some of this per pupil allocation if you're interested in watching. It's a work session in the afternoon. But that's what really where the rubber meets the road is, could it change the level of funding or the level of staffing that you might have at a school? And you know, you're an NBC teacher. And so at the NBCs, you know, we want to make sure that the NBCs are at schools, of all the schools. And so it could mean for a teacher that the superintendent may need to transfer somebody, you know, which I think everybody thinks about that process and wants to make sure teachers are in schools that they want to be in. But that's one of the considerations that may come into play. So I think it's really important to understand your school demographics, because it does change how the staffing. And I think all CFOs and all LEAs want to get a base foundation funding, staffing, right? Because we know that you need X amount of teachers to do the work, X amount of secretaries and aides and all of that kind of thing. But that's where you could see it. And as the school systems really look at their budgets, that's where you may see the change happen.
No, thank you.
Mr. Liu, I love your question, and I'm processing it still as well. And I kind of think that as if I put on my former teacher hat or my former principal hat, in order to ask the right questions, you have to be armed with more information than tonight's presentation, right? So tonight gives you a piece of the puzzle, but then one of the most important pieces that I'd be more curious about, rather than thinking just about my classroom or my individual school, would be what is my school doing or my district doing, to meet the transformation efforts and initiatives in Blueprint. Where are we? Like, I wouldn't want to have to operate under with funds never being released, right? Like, is my district on track for transforming and doing what the Kirwan Commission studied and researched and found to be what our students need? So that's going to involve going back to other pieces that we've looked at and pieces that your colleagues in our other advisory committees have looked at. What does career counseling look like in my county? What does the career ladder look like in my county? What does the comprehensive literacy and math plan look like? What are we doing with minimum school funding? Like, I think there's a lot of pieces that people need to be informed on to be able to ask the questions of, is our county moving in the right direction towards the initiatives identified in the Blueprint? And so there's a lot of pieces there. You've got to look at pre-K. Where are we with 3 and 4-year-olds? And is that having the intended outcome? Are the students that are gaining access to schools earlier having better success by 3rd grade? So I think, Mr. Liu, my answer would be that it's complicated, but you've got to ask, how are we doing towards these? What are the harder things for us to do? Where are the tough decisions that need to be made? And to Heather's point, even things like, how are we doing with national board recruitment? Are we seeing teachers and schools getting more and more interest in teachers becoming nationally board certified? And are we getting our best teachers in front of our kids who need them the most? Like, I think you'd have to drill into a lot of layers with it. And I love your question and hope that folks will. And I wonder if my team could even create some type of a guide or something of some questions to be thinking about, to help people find. Most of those resources are on our website for each county and will be as they get approved. Like, some career ladders are approved, and we've got those for you, but we will be getting the rest of them up there. But I think you've kind of exposed the truth that you've got to do your research to be able to ask the right questions. Does that help at all? I gave you a lot of homework.
To that end, because I wonder if you could show us where like stakeholders and parent groups and things could actually find that information. I see some data is coming out in fall 2025. I've seen the initial implementation plans, but like where would we see how this LEAs are progressing?
Let me see here. Does anybody want to share their screen, and I will walk you through our brand new, just launched. I may not click every right button, but I can tell you the broad places of where things are. And then the other piece, Evelyn, they will be, thank you. There are some career ladders that are approved from our September meeting. There'll be more added when we get past this week's meeting. And as things get approved, they will be posted. So here, and then also,
Website looks great. I have to say, I didn't see the new one until just now. It does look fantastic.
You're showcasing for us. I love it. One thing I'll add is that tonight's PowerPoint slide will be sent to you, and there are links to those three: the minimum school funding, the career ladders, and the career ladder career counseling MOUs. So at the top, let's go ahead and click together. Yeah, you found all the LEA plans.
I am.
So, that gives the history of the 2 years of the submissions of the plans. Hang on one second here. And if anybody else knows the best place to go to get to, scroll down a little bit on implementation plans where you are.
Oh, okay.
But they were organized.
You're just seeing my website, right? Not my. I'm like, hopefully they're not seeing all my dirty laundry.
There, the top of the 2025 LEA submissions includes the level 4, the career ladder level 4 over to the left.
This one right here.
Is that clickable?
Not yet. No.
Okay.
Wait. Oh, you know what? The individual.
There you go.
Should we go down? Let's take Montgomery County, my home county.
You could put it in their counties. Yes.
Would it be submissions or?
Yes.
Okay, let's see. So
then you can go backwards. Now, remember, it's only once they're approved. We're putting them up once they get through the full process. So if I could take you to Anne Arundel County, I can tell you that their career ladder was approved last month. We could look at theirs.
Okay, let's go back. And then Anne Arundel. Okay, here we go. View submissions.
Yes. And then, well, what's up? Anne Arundel County 2025 career ladder. Is that what it is?
Okay. It's their submission.
And go ahead all the way down. Keep scrolling. It should be a pretty long submission. So you'll see their career ladder. At the upcoming meeting, we will be bringing some career counseling components for board approval and consideration. So these, where you've landed, is what will grow as other pieces are added. And then if anybody wants to go back and see, well, what did my county submit last year? You'll be able to find those as well. So where you landed is the right place under the plans to be able to track where things get added. Also, if you join or catch a meeting later, under the meetings tab, we always post the meeting agenda and the meeting slide deck and the meeting resources. So the folders will also be linked in the meetings tab as well.
Okay, so under AIB meetings or
AIB meetings.
AIB meetings.
And you did just point out a new feature that we've been able to separate on the website, the AIB meetings versus the advisory committee meetings, so that now that we have a couple of years worth of meetings, you can sort through and find things a little bit more quickly. But yes, for each meeting, you can find the agenda, and then you can find related materials linked within. For linked materials, they may or may not be linked yet for this upcoming meeting, but if you go back to September, you'll find all the meeting links that were available, previous meetings.
Perfect.
I saw on the other page there was previous meetings, but yes, there's an AIB meeting from September, and the meeting agenda will take you to the meeting materials. Everything hyperlinked is a folder that you could go to and find any of the counties that were presented for approval there with career ladders.
Okay. And what would AI be looking for in terms of progress right now? So, specifically, I'm thinking about like the math implementation plans, and does that include sort of implementing the upcoming changes to this our entire math K through 12 standards, or is it just their plan for improving math?
The math is actually something that MSDE receives. So each county received guidance on what needed to be included in a comprehensive pre-K to 12 math plan. And they've been working on these. It feels like it's been maybe 18 months, a year and a half, I think it sounds about right. And they've had information from MSDE, and Johns Hopkins is also supporting some of this work to help develop these. There is a thorough review process that MSDE has established and invited AIB staff to participate in, and Gretchen Cheney has been involved on our end. They met in person last week and worked in groups with the rubric to review that comprehensive math plan. For right now, that math plan is it's very similar to the comprehensive literacy plans that were approved last year, where it's the district-wide plan of their how they do math in their district or how they do reading in their district by grade level. So MSDE did create rubrics and does have the expectations that they shared with the districts prior to them being developed, so that the districts knew what they were aiming for or required to submit. We can definitely work to, and we will be sharing more information about this at our meeting this coming, I think in October. And then we don't anticipate having those recommendations, I believe, until our November meeting. But MSDE will make that recommendation to us about those plans.
Okay. And then I saw you had mentioned there was the career ladder, then also there was the, I think, workforce development.
Career counseling. It's a partnership between workforce boards, community colleges, and local school systems.
Oh, career counseling. Got it. Okay.
So they turn in an MOU each year, which includes a budget. Sometimes the MOU covers multiple years, but pretty much for all of our counties, all but one, they need to submit an updated budget each year. And so their MOU kind of gets resubmitted to us with the current year's budget, because the allocation changes annually based on student enrollment and inflationary increases. So we get a new MOU from each partnership in each county. And currently this year, our team reviews those. Moving forward, MSDE is going to be taking over that process with a standardized MOU and a review and a recommendation to the AIB as well. So there's an MOU. If you are also curious about more information about that in your county, the counties wrote about their career counseling plans in their implementation plans. They have submitted 2 annual reports on what career counseling looks like in each district, and those are available on our website as well, and we can get you links to that. But there's 2 of those that are submitted in July, and then last year and this year, just recently, October 15th, they have submitted their fiscal reports on how the money is being spent to implement career counseling for every 6th through 12th grader in the district, every middle and high school student.
Okay. And so you're mostly looking to make sure that the money that is being given by the state is being used for the purpose intended, and that their plans look sound and in line with what the intent of the blueprint plan
You
is?
got it. So we're looking to see that every 6th through 12th grader, every middle and every high school student is receiving career counseling, and that their plan aligns to what is expected in the law. And then, yes, we look at the fiscal side separate from the MOU. That's a different review, but looks just, to make sure that the money is being spent in the allowable ways.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep, absolutely.
Any other questions? Rachel, you and I are on the same wavelength. Evelyn, thank you for those questions, though. That was really helpful in bringing the content together with what is being posted and the timeline. So thank you.
If no one else has a question, I do have one other question. So, so the other piece, you had mentioned expert review teams, and I'm trying to understand how that ends up like affecting any of the decisions about release of funding.
Sure.
Because I'm still waiting. I see some of the reports. Reports are coming up for the expert review teams for the literacy review. So, like, what happens next after that? Like, how does that feed into the process of the release of funding?
Sure. So this year it doesn't. I think, Heidi, correct me, is it next year legislatively that it can? I want to make sure I get that part right. Fiscal year.
I'm not aware that there's like a statutory limitation on that this year. Certainly starting in FY26, an ERT can make a recommendation that funds be released. However, I don't know that and that's going to be on an individual school basis, because those reviews are done on an individual school basis. But I don't know that any ERTs would be, I don't know if they're planning to make any recommendations this year, simply because they're just sort of getting up to speed.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I know that, like, AIB staff, we review the expert review team plans from both MSDE and the CTE committee. And I didn't see that mentioned in their plans for this year, just after reading those two documents. But if you look in the law, essentially the expert review teams are meant to be teams of experts that are going into schools that have a specific lens and understanding of why that school was getting a visit, or potentially which student groups they might be looking at. And the expert review teams have a group of people on site that are kind of the eyes of the implementation monitoring, to be able to go through. I think in the session that we talked about expert review teams, we talked about sometimes they've had rubrics in the past, and they've used different feedback forms, and they use a variety of inputs to be able to hear from educators, school leadership, students. Like, they're talking to lots of different groups of people in the school to get that information and help them inform their decisions. But at the end of the day, the law does envision that they can make a report or a recommendation if they are concerned that a school is not implementing as it is expected to be, or not. Let's say a visit. Some schools get visited annually, right? If they remain on a low performing list, they get an annual visit. If they don't implement the suggestions that came from the expert review team visit, or would not be complying, that they're not moving towards the expected progress that should be made. So we've not actually crossed this bridge yet of receiving a recommendation from either an MSDE expert review team or a CTE expert review team to say that yet, but that is a possibility in the future.
And for once the math plans are approved, or I guess they haven't approved, so are there going to be expert review teams for math as well, or is that a different? They're not doing. Is that only for literacy?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Rachel heard the question or is able to come off of mute. Because she would definitely need to answer that question. I believe that there's a plan, but I don't.
Heidi, sorry, it did cut out for a second there.
Okay.
Could you repeat that one for me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, is there a plan to also do similar expert review teams for math as they did for literacy?
Yes, there are math visits happening this year. And so there's a methodology that you can find on our website in the reports. If you look for the 2025 expert review team report by the MSDE submission, and the methodology explains who gets picked. This year we expanded from just reading to reading or math. So a school could be selected as lowest performing, lower performing, highest or higher performing in reading or in math. And so we do visit more reading schools than we visit math schools. But they are happening now. And similar to how MSTE partnered with Mile for the literacy visits, they are partnering with Johns Hopkins University for the math visits.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Well, we have a couple more minutes before we're going to close out, and we wanted to raise a few questions to the committee. One, and you can feel free to send these, and I'm sorry, but I think in perhaps a little bit of the reorg, we have lost access to our to our Pillar 5 folder. So I can't give you the link to the topic brainstorm that we usually do.
I'll have it fixed by tomorrow, Amy.
Okay, no problem. I just
Yep.
I was
I know
gonna give
exactly
folks
what happened.
a place to dump some of their ideas, but I don't know that we have access to that. So if you do have topics that you would like the Pillar 5 to explore, feel free to email Javon's Lou and I for the time being, and we'll populate that. One of the and Evelyn, this was raised as a suggestion, I think, by you. Are there crossover topics that would make sense for us to tackle? So, for example, does it make sense to partner with Pillar 2 or Pillar 3 and really delve into these cross-cutting topics from the AIB's perspective, whether that be high quality instructional materials or math implementation or college and career readiness? So as these areas start to converge in your minds, it may behoove us to partner or collaborate with another pillar committee to really delve into some of these cross-cutting topics. And I know, being that Pillar 5 is the accountability and governance, there are so many things that can. So we'd like to start brainstorming what those topic areas might be, so that we can begin to plan out what the topics for this year could look like. With that said, Lou and I are opening up the opportunity to be chair and or co-chair for this year moving forward. We've both very much enjoyed the role, but we also recognize that we have a large committee, and my goodness, there is so much expertise and ways that these Pillar 5 meetings could go. So we would love to share that opportunity and pass the torch to someone else who would be interested in developing these content topics, running the planning meetings, figuring out who might be the best folks to come and speak to the topic areas so that we can illuminate areas and recommendations together, as well as unpack what could be considered known information, but oftentimes isn't known to us necessarily, because if this is the water that you're swimming in, you understand it, but it's not universally understood. So just want to open that up for any discussion now. If anyone is interested in those roles or a different role, we could also create different kinds of roles.
And
So,
could I add to that?
sure, Rachel.
To annually, the AIB does ask every advisory committee to have this conversation and to give everybody the opportunity. I would love to take a minute to thank Amy and Mr. Liu for the incredible work you did in kicking off this advisory committee. Pillar 5 has been different, right? We have a lot of people on this committee, and that's been challenging even just to find meeting times that we could. But to wrap your heads and the whole committee's head around what is Pillar 5, what is governance and accountability, you've really kicked us off very well. It's my understanding that you both are still available to stay in leadership if that's a possibility. But we do ask that each group talk about this, and if there are other folks that would like to be involved in helping support the work, if we would love to be able to brainstorm with you also about ways to include you in the leadership of the committee as well. So that's the purpose of tonight's conversation, annual discussion about leadership of the advisory committee. And I can add, since everybody's kind of quiet, and I'll fill the space if I need to. If you don't want to say anything right now, you can email me or email Amy and Mr. Liu as well, and we can talk in between the meetings as well if you'd rather not talk about it here.
Ms. Davis, you have your hand up.
Hey, everybody. Sorry, I was cooking dinner, so let me get on camera. But yeah, we talked last year. So if there is, because I know everybody's busy, but if there is a way that I can kind of like help take up some of the slack, it doesn't have to be an official title. I don't really care. But if there's a way that I can like help out, I know last year we did the expert review team committee meetings and things like that. So if you need help with additional topics or just doing certain things, then I don't mind helping.
Thank you for that.
I just want to say I agree. You guys have been great. So I hope you just sign on again. It was a lot, especially in the beginning, to kind of wrap our heads around even how to organize this. And you guys did a really great job in keeping us moving forward and keeping us organized.
Thank you. We had a lot of help from Rachel and from the committee members, so really appreciate it. But really and truly, if there are other, and we're happy to help too.
Well, we really appreciate you all. Can you, it's silent on my end. Can you all, is anybody else talking?
No, Rachel.
Okay, perfect. Well, we appreciate you all thinking about it. And again, if you want to email or consider it an email in between, we will gladly discuss how to increase the opportunities to be involved in kind of setting the course for the rest of this year. But this has been a fabulous meeting tonight. Really appreciate the topic and then our team for being here tonight. And I think we're all probably going to dream about this tonight and wonder. So if you do have future questions, definitely let us know. And I don't know, Amy, did you want to foreshadow the November topic?
Ooh, Rachel, absolutely. So we're thinking the waiver and a little bit more background on the minimum school funding, especially since that came up in this meeting. It's been a carryover question from our Finance 101 meeting. And so, but if you would rather give finance a break and want to move on to something else, by all means, we're open.
Are the waivers at the LEA level or sometimes at the school level?
They're actually
I think the short answer to that question is yes, it depends upon the LOI.
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's definitely the statute anticipates that there could be individual schools that are in need of a waiver, or entire systems. So
Yeah, it's really, that'll be very interesting. It's sort of recently come up just because we have had some questions about, let's say a magnet school that's high performing and they've created their own curriculum all these years. Should they be required to take on, like, do sort of an externally vetted, off-the-shelf curriculum versus what they're doing, which might be more innovative, but a little harder to, but also harder to kind of, like, is there potential for a waiver for schools that are, showing they're meeting certain metrics, right? I know, like in New York, there used to be that kind of rule about, certain Regents exams and things that you got waivers for if the school was, they didn't have to necessarily follow certain things as long as the school, everyone was sort of meeting certain targets. So I'm very interested in the next topic. That's a preview of questions I'll have.
sure, I would encourage you to go online. There's like I said, I think we'll maybe link it to the it wasn't linked tonight, and I'm sorry about that, to the slide deck, the guidance document for the waiver request. It provides a whole lot of like reasons why waivers can be requested.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, when is the next this group's advisory committee meeting? What is that date?
Should be November 10th, 6 o'clock.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
And I just wanted to echo Miss Evelyn, especially I'm highly in support of the waiver idea for the next topic in nature. Just seeing how I wasn't able to attend the last meeting, I think this would be a great opportunity for me to get more knowledge on it. I've been kind of listening and just been taking notes today for my own personal sake. So I would greatly appreciate that.
Now,
Thanks,
you
Kevin.
know, that makes me think that if anybody wants the first version, when we've already talked about waivers a little bit within the public at a public AIB board meeting. So I can pull the link and send that around for background information when the Carroll County team came to present their request. There's just some really good information that was already shared. And then you can also hear the conversation between the Carroll County team, both the superintendent and 2 assistant superintendents and our board members, just about what that process was like. So all of our meetings are live streamed and recorded, and the meeting materials, that slide deck and all of that would be available. So I'd be happy to send that around as well. Amy and Mr. Luz, if I've made a lot of promises tonight to send things around, you might need to help send me a list to remember, but I'll remember that one, and I'll remember to make sure that your Drive access is working. But we can definitely, it might be helpful for you to hear some of the content that happened earlier this year in I feel like it was April or May, but I can get you links to those things.
Thanks, Rachel. All right. Well, I think without further ado, we're going to close this one out and thank very much our AIB partners, our committee members, Heather and Candace, for sharing your perspectives and timeline. Gavin, welcome. And we will see you all November 10th. Please send content ideas and interests in planning these meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.